Welcome to episode 86 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists at the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who is not familiar with our podcast, please visit EpicureanFriends.com, where you'll find our goals and our ground rules. If you have any questions about those, please be sure to contact us at the forum for more information. In this episode 86, we'll read approximately Latin lines 423 through 527 as we discuss rain and storms, and we continue further into Book 6. I apologize that I'm going to sound congested in today's reading, but Don and Martin do fine. So let's now join Don reading today's text.
It is easy from what has been observed to apprehend the cause of those whirlwinds which the Greeks from the nature of things justly call Presters, and how they descend from above and fall into the sea. They are sometimes seen to descend from the air into the water like a pillar, and the sea, raging about with violent blasts of wind, seems to boil and is exceedingly tossed, and whatever ships are caught within the reach of the hurricane are in the utmost danger of being cast away. This happens when the force of the wind, impetuously whirling within the cloud, is not able to break it, but drives it on, so that it falls like a column let down into the sea. This descent is gradual, as if it was thrust by some hand or arm and spread over the waters. When the cloud bursts, the fury of the wind breaks out among the waves, and violently whirling round takes fire, and raises a wonderful heat and fermentation in the waters. For a rolling whirlwind descends with the cloud, which being slow in its motion, it bears along with it through the air. And when it has thrust the heavy body of the cloud into the sea, it plunges furiously with it into the water, and with a dreadful noise sets all the element in a blaze. It sometimes happens that a whirlwind, as it passes through the air, will scrape off some seeds from the bodies of the clouds, and rolling itself within, will look like a prester descending from above into the sea. When this vortex of wind falls upon the earth, it bursts out without being kindled into flame. It whirls with mighty force and raises a tempest and bears down everything before it. This sort of whirlwind is not common on land, for the high hills hinder its descent and breaks its force, but it appears frequently in the wide sea and in the open air. Now for the origin of clouds. These are formed when certain rough and hooked seeds, as they fly about at length, unite in the higher region of the air that is above us, but are held together loosely, and not bound in a close and strict embrace. Of these, the thin and small clouds are first produced, and many of them meeting together and pressing close, make the large and heavy clouds which the winds drive every way abroad till they break out into a raging storm. And then, the nearer the tops of mountains approach the sky, the higher they are, the more they smoke and appear covered with the thick darkness of a yellow cloud, because the mists that arise are so thin and subtle that before they are discovered by the eye, they are carried aloft by the winds to the tops of the highest hills. And since they unite there in larger bodies, and show thick and condensed, they seem to rise from the tops of these hills into the air. For when we ascend a high mountain, the thing itself and the sense demonstrate that the winds tend to the highest places and reign there. Besides, that nature raises many exhalations from the wide sea is plain, by observing that garments expanded upon the shore will soon be wet, and therefore to form such vast bodies of clouds, many seeds are thrown off and arise from the motion of salt waters. And we see that mists and watery particles rise from all the rivers and from the earth itself, which, like a vapor, are from thence squeezed out and carried upwards, and cover the whole heavens with darkness, and uniting together by degrees are sufficient to produce the clouds. For the seeds that are continually descending from above in a confused manner continually beat these mists upon the back, and by condensing and pressing them close, form them into clouds over all the sky. It may be, likewise, that seeds from without, from the immense space of the universe, may flow hither, and unite in the production of the flying clouds. For I have proved before that these seeds are without number, and that the void is infinite. I have shown how suddenly and with what celerity they pass through this boundless space. It is no wonder, therefore, that tempests and dark clouds are in so short a time frequently spread over the whole heavens, and cover the high mountains, the seas, and the earth with so quick a motion, since from every quarter, through all the passages of the air, through all the breathing places, I may say, of the universe, the seeds can make their way hither and unite or withdraw and fly away again. And now I shall explain in what manner the rain is formed within the clouds above, and falls down in showers upon the earth. I shall first show that many seeds of rain are raised from everything, together with the clouds, and that they increase together, both the clouds and the rain contained within, in the same manner as the blood increases in proportion with our bodies, or as sweat or any other moisture diffused through the limbs. The clouds likewise, like hanging fleeces of wool, suck up many particles of salt water when the winds drive them over the open sea. And so by the same rule, a quantity of moisture is raised into the clouds from all the rivers, and there these many seeds of waters, meeting from all parts and uniting variously together, the clouds being full, are obliged to discharge their load of moisture for two reasons. Either the force of winds drives them close, or the number of them, raised one above another, presses them down from above with their own weight, and makes the showers to pour down. Besides, when the clouds are made rare and thin by the winds, or dissolved by the heat of the sun striking upon them, they discharge their rainy moisture and drop, as wax dissolves and melts over a hot fire. But expect a violent storm of rain when these clouds heaped up are pressed, not only by their own weight, but driven close by the stroke of winds from without. The rains used to confine us long at home, and to last for some time, when there are seeds of moisture in abundance, when the dropping clouds are raised on heaps above and are driven every way abroad, and when the earth, thoroughly soaked, sends back the vapors into the air. And when the sun, in a dark storm of rain, strikes with its beams directly upon an opposite cloud full of moisture, then you see the colors of the rainbow drawn upon the black clouds, and all other appearances which are formed and increase in the upper regions of the air, and all the meteors that are raised in the clouds, the snow, the winds, the hail, the chilling frosts, and the strong ice that hardens the surface of the waters, and stops and binds up the current of rivers as they flow. It is easy to account for all these, and to apprehend their causes, and how they are produced, if you consider well the virtue and power of the seeds from whence they spring.
Thank you, Don. It's easy to understand all these things, as you've just said. Once you think about the fundamental elements of the universe, I guess, is our message for today.
I love the way he goes on for line after line after line about the wind and the rain. And then at the end, he's like, hey, the snow, the wind, the hail, the chilling frost. Yeah, you can explain all that easy.
That's right. Okay. Well, before we started today, we were having a brief conversation about some of the background of this. Let's go back and cover some of that using passage 423 to talk about what the word Presters means. I see at least once in this passage the word hurricane appears, but I bet all I can do is speak for myself and say I have no clue or had no clue what a Prester was in reading all this, nor did I have a clue whether they had hurricanes in Athens or Rome in the area where this was written. So let's try to clear that up for today. And you said you looked into it, Don?
Yeah, the Prester, according to the LSJ, the main dictionary, the definition is a hurricane or waterspout attended with lightning. And Prester it's a Greek word. They have the Greek right there. Prester. It's mentioned by Aristotle in his treatise on meteorology, evidently. And it said that the Prester is a variant of if we transliterate it, it would be Typhon. So it looks like typhoon, which kind of surprised me. But that is described as a whirlwind, which forms within a cloud, and being unable to separate itself from the cloud, descends to the earth, bringing the cloud with it. And so then and this seems to be the tornado or the waterspout of modern meteorology. A tornado is a very intense progressive whirl of small diameter, and then the funnel-shaped cloud is presumably the cloud which Aristotle's whirlwind draws down with it. So they're talking about that Aristotle described whirlwinds and typhons, or however we want to pronounce that, and the Presters. But from what I could see, the Prester is a whirlwind or waterspout that descends into the water that is accompanied by lightning. So it looks like it's on fire.
I don't think I'm familiar with anything like that. Martin, can you explain to us what kind of phenomena they have in the Mediterranean that they could be talking about here?
Oh, when we don't have that kind of stuff that much in Germany. So they definitely don't have hurricanes. So what they get in the Mediterranean is by far not as big as a hurricane. So I read before that for the recent few hundred years where we have records, I think there were only 2 really hurricanes hitting Europe, and they were in Portugal and Spain. So that were Atlantic hurricanes.
Yeah.
But for the Mediterranean, they have also the same pattern, that you have this whirlwind, but it doesn't become as big. No? And nowadays, it's also not dangerous from the wind. It's more that the torrential rains which come with it. So they sometimes produce damage. No? But that might have been different, because otherwise, how would Lucretius have known that? So apparently ships were in danger by these phenomena at that time.
Well, that would have to be a terrifying thing if you were out on the Mediterranean and you saw a flaming whirlwind coming out of the sky even once. I'm sure it would make an impression.
Yeah, let's talk about the flame for a second. I'm definitely not familiar with that. I've seen, all the pictures of tornadoes and so forth I see in the United States. I don't recall really any flame or
the only thing I can really think of there is that it would be lightning within the cloud of the whirlwind, and so it looks like it's burning from the inside if you have these flashes of lightning that are from the inside of the whirlwind. So that would be how I would interpret that.
Yes, and that sounds correct to me. And this one would then also explain some of these wrong explanations in Lucretius. Also, if you look at it, what actually happens is not that, if you go back to the regular whirlwinds, so there the water, at least in this, I don't know how to say this, the storm actually the main movement is up. It's around in the circle, of course, and then up, not down. No? So it comes actually from the water and goes up. And you can see this also from the decay in air pressure. No? So because, and that's why also they're called cyclones. No? So because there's an upward movement of the air, which is then associated with a loss in pressure. And then, of course, to balance this out further outside, then the wind goes down and moves towards that center of the storm, then closer to the surface of the water.
So you could actually have the water literally being sucked up into the cloud because of the difference in air pressure then.
Yeah, possibly that will happen, because a strong wind will accelerate the evaporation of the water, and also because of these strong waves, and you get this phenomenon that the water is dispersed into many droplets. So normally when you have a storm with big waves, they will form a really dense mist around the waves, and on top of the waves is foam. No? The water is made into foam. No? And of course, from there, you can immediately saturate the air basically to 100% of its capacity. And then when the air movement goes up and it cools down, then this will explain why we have then a lot of rain coming with the whirlwind when it forms above water.
That all sounds absolutely terrifying.
Martin, also, I guess the period of time we're talking about when this was written, the Romans would have been in contact with England. I don't know whether this would be before or after the Roman invasion of Britain, but what about the west coast of France and England? Do they see hurricanes off of the Atlantic?
No. So there are no more that strong. I mean, of course, they will be affected by stronger winds and rain, but the hurricanes then will have lost too much in strength. So they will normally be called hurricanes. So it's their remainders which end up there.
Do hurricanes typically travel from east to west in the Atlantic?
Yes,
I know
exactly.
we've been hearing in the United States about one barreling down on Louisiana just like within the next 24 hours, it sounds like. So all the tracks are like east to west.
Even those which are formed in the eastern Atlantic tend to move west. So this is what I mentioned. So in recent history, we have only two real hurricanes hitting a part of Europe, and that's Portugal and Spain.
So they don't continue up. I mean, and I know they go up the east coast of the United States and they'll hit New York and go into Newfoundland and whatever, but they don't rotate all the way around and follow the what do you call the current they have there? The Gulf Stream, and go all the way to England is what you're saying.
I think
Martin?
by the time they hit the colder water, they lose all their power because they generate more power from the warmer water. In the equatorial zones and that sort of thing, and then they sort of play themselves out whenever they come over land and then get into the colder water.
Yes.
Okay.
So but we have different reasons for heavy storms. So two expeditions of the Romans ended badly when, after successful campaigns in Germany, they went by ship in autumn back, and they got into these North Sea storms, which are not like the the hurricanes, but they themselves cause extremely high waves, and if the ship isn't built for this, it will sink.
Well, before we move on from the first passage, I don't guess there's anything in what we have as a parenthetical expression where it says with which the Greeks from the nature of things justly call Presters. Is there any reference there when he talks about the nature of things? That's so obvious.
That was kind of interesting. I didn't realize what was going on there.
Yeah, I see Bailey and Monroe both just say which the Greeks from their nature call have named fiery Presters.
And Stallings doesn't even refer to that nature thing there, but she doesn't use the word Presters either. She calls them blowers.
Maybe there's something about the Greek word prester that indicates
what Greeks call blowers, water spouts.
Yeah. All right. Well, the second passage, 431, anything there? Probably that's just mainly a repeat of what we've been discussing. With the dreadful noise sets all the elements in a blaze. Yeah, there's several references here to fire, which, like you say, must be a reference to lightning.
Yeah, so it looks like the clouds are on fire if you have the lightning within the cloud itself.
Right. Okay, well, 443. Don't let me go too fast there, Don, if you see something you'd like to talk about.
No. The only thing I'll mention is that I've done this a number of times, but Lucretius's, or if he's using Epicurus' words, their powers of observation, I think, are top rate. It just surprises me how the tiniest details he seems to mull over.
Yeah, I think we're ready to move to 451, and I think we're ready to move to 451 in the origin of clouds. Or does anybody have anything else to say about tempests? Okay, so let's move on to what we have as 451 and talk about the origin of clouds. And of course, they are formed when rough and hooked seeds fly about at length unite in the higher regions. So, and he's saying the thin and small clouds are first produced and meet together and make the large and heavy clouds.
I find it interesting, and this is going to bring in some of the paragraphs that come later, but I find it interesting that he doesn't equate the water itself with the mist in the clouds in such a way. It almost sounds like whenever he talks about the rain farther on, it's like the clouds he sees as some sort of fleece or some sort of material that soaks up the water and then releases it, instead of seeing the clouds themselves as composed of water. I found it interesting that he couldn't quite, at least to me, didn't seem to quite be able to make that connection.
That's an interesting point.
Because it almost sounds like, when he's talking about the pressing down, so that's what will squeeze the clouds and actually squeeze the water out. Like if you put a sponge in water and then squeeze it out, that the cloud is the sponge and the water is the rain. But he's not sort of making the connection between the water and the rain.
Yeah, if we want to be, make a benevolent interpretation, then we can interpret the air as a sponge, and then the movement down or up from of the air will be associated with it. But of course, it's normally the opposite what he says. So it's when the air goes up, then the water comes out, not when it's pushed down.
Exactly. I did get some satisfaction about him observing about the clouds coming off the top of the mountains and making that observation that you can obviously see clouds being formed up there. And he says, well, it's because the mists go up the mountains and then they're pushed together at the top of the mountains. So the mountains aren't, making the clouds. They're just the fact that it's up higher and there's more wind and that sort of thing.
Well, I believe you've almost taken us to line 470, and that one has interested me here because when I first started reading it, I thought this was a repeat of the example from earlier. I think it's book 1 or book 2, where he talks about garments being wet, drying off. But actually, this is the reverse of drying off. And I'm not even sure that I guess he's right. Is he right about that? If you spread a garment on a seashore, that it becomes wet just from the salt water, from the water in the air? Is that something that happens on the ocean?
That's what I said. Now, if you have the waves, especially the bigger waves, you will produce mist from that one. And this one will make it wet. And also it carries salt in these droplets. No? So that means you also get then salt from that one.
Well, I like the ocean, and I thought I've been there enough to observe that, but that's something that I'm not familiar with. Don, have you witnessed that?
Well, I guess it depend on what shore you're on, too. I mean, if you're on somewhere there's a lot of waves kicking up and things like that, there's going to be more mist in the air. But if you're on a beach in Miami or the Riviera, the sun's probably going to take care of any of the mist that would come from some of the smaller waves and things like that. So I think it just depends on the situation.
if you go to the beach because the weather is nice, chances are the waves are very low. So then
Right.
it doesn't happen that much, and it's especially not visible. So I saw a table. So the stronger the wind gets and the higher the waves come, then you observe this foam, and then eventually the mist forms. And this can become very dense in strong storms. No? But at that times, when this happens, that you can see it, you will not be at the beach.
In fact, Martin, you have me wondering now. My geography of Germany has never been very good, but these European countries on the north side where they have, I guess that's the North Sea. I guess people go to the beach at the North Sea just like they go to the Riviera or to someplace in Florida. But I would suspect that the climate and the temperatures and things would be a lot different there, or just all the regions around Norway and Sweden and Denmark and so forth. Of course, Lucretius would have been talking about the Mediterranean versus those things, but maybe it's easier to observe this phenomena and Don's making the point that the sun would burn it off. I'm used to the sun burning everything off when I go to the beach, I guess. But I guess if the sun's not so bright and hot, like on the northern side of Europe, or maybe even the Mediterranean, maybe you see that happen more frequently.
And you also see some of the coasts along, because I guess I don't want to read too much into his shores. So I mean there are different kinds of coastlines too. If you look at some of the coasts along like California, where the cliffs are really steep and the waves just smash on the cliffs and put up all the mists and everything from the crashing waves on those cliffs. I mean, you can definitely get some mist there.
Yeah.
But I do find your observation interesting that he talked about the clothes drying in one part and now the clothes getting wet in this part. So again, different contexts and different scenarios can be used for different illustrations.
Yeah, I had never noticed that comparison before. Okay, and 476 and 483.
And again, I think we've mentioned it before, and I think Lucretius has mentioned it before, and I can't remember whether it was in book 5 or book 6. About the whole idea of the water cycle. And I think that he has a good basic, and Martin can feel free to say something about that it seems to have a good idea of the water cycle, but the water being evaporated and forming clouds, whether the clouds are materials or rain or mist or whatever, and then the rain coming back and the cycle starting all over again.
Yes. So that one, the overall picture he got right.
I do go down to 483. I do find it kind of, let's say, odd whenever he talks about the seeds coming in from outside our own world, outside our own little part of the universe.
Yeah, there's definitely
the clouds
something there.
Can be formed of seeds that come from outside, and they can be dispersed so quickly because they go outside. So
it doesn't seem like he's got a very accurate concept of just the distances involved. Once you get to the ceiling of the sky, it all seems to be in one place.
Yeah, the vault of heaven. I do not think that he has the idea that it's light years away to the end of the visible universe. It definitely strikes me just from this that you have like the sky, and then you have the clouds, and then just beyond the clouds is the vault of the heavens where the stars and the planets and everything reside, and there's some sort of permeable barrier there that the seeds from outside our world can come in and form our own clouds.
Yeah, I don't know that it's very totally prominent here, but he clearly is thinking about that aspect of elements coming from other worlds to our world, like he's referenced, I guess, in the past.
And it might bring up, I mean, whenever they talk about other worlds and other peoples and things like that on other worlds, that if you think of his concept or Epicurus's concept of the world where it would be the globe of the earth, and then our clouds, and then the globe that surrounds us with the stars and the planets. I mean, that's a fairly self-contained little packet of the universe. And so if you talk about other worlds, they may technically not be that far away if that is your concept of what our world is, with that little shell of planets and stars around us. That the other one could be not that far away, and so there are other worlds that aren't that far away, but it seems like it's a much more compact, quote unquote, world than I think we normally think of it too. Because even whenever we had talked about it before, I thought of the stars and the planets in the shell that surrounded the Earth, being pretty far away. But this sort of makes me think that is a lot more compact than what I had originally envisioned that they would think of it as.
Yeah, as we're talking about it, I'm not even clear anymore in my mind whether he thinks that the stars and the lights we see in the sky are actually planets and so forth themselves. It's almost like that those are features of the vault.
Exactly.
And then on the other side of those things, there's another world. There are other worlds like ours with other vaults and planets within them, maybe.
Exactly.
So it's really not even necessarily the case that he would look up at any particular star and say, well, maybe there's life on that star. Maybe he's talking about something on the other side of that.
Exactly. The life would be on the other world that's encased in its own little vault of heaven somewhere else in the infinite universe, and that those stars that we see are just points of light or points of flame, or however he's described it before, that there's nothing could live on the stars or the planets, because if I remember correctly, planet is just the Greek word for wandering star, because they move around differently than the other stars in the background. Yeah. So that's so that if you have something that's going to live on another world, it has to have its own other little shell of stars, and then its own little rocky world in the middle of that shell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, I mean, he cannot have known this, but I read one theory that the reason why we have surface water on Earth is from meteorites, no? So that they provide. So that means in that sense, the water we have actually came in from outside. I mean, not from far away. It came probably from the asteroid belt or somewhere. Huh? And then that's why we have this water. But of course, when these come in, they come at a time only a few, and that is not enough to form really a cloud. So it would not produce this mechanism. But the mere fact that we have surface water here, that might be due to this coming from outside in.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't see it as I'm scanning right this second, but the word meteorite does appear in this today somewhere, I think. So yeah, he's considering meteorites to be a feature of the meteorological phenomena of sort of the clouds,
right? As
opposed to something that we would think of it.
So I have nothing to back it up, but he could. I mean, since he talks about the seeds coming together and the hooked and the rough and that sort of thing, that I mean, possibly if you use that as your starting point, you could extrapolate that into the meteorites that fall from quote unquote the sky must have been formed in the sky somewhere and came from there. Again, I think what we've just said here is that there's no real conception of a rocky world in the vault of the heavens somewhere. That if a rock falls out of the sky, it's going to have to be formed in our quote unquote sky somewhere and fall out from there.
Yeah. Well, what we have is line 495 is, I guess, largely the same water cycle material that we've been talking about already.
And that's where we get into about the hanging fleeces of wool, and they suck up the water and that sort of thing. That's what made me think of these thinking of the clouds as a substance to soak up water as opposed to water itself.
Right.
Yeah, and the clouds being full are obliged to discharge their load of moisture for two reasons. And then once again, we get into that, it could be this or it could be this.
Yeah.
And of course, the case it is in one aspect is wrong. No? So that means it's the other way around.
Right.
So explain that, Martin. What do you say?
Yes, the last sentence in that paragraph. Besides, when the clouds are made rare and thin by the winds or are dissolved by the heat of the sun striking upon them, they discharge their rainy moisture and drop as wax dissolves and melts over hot fire. And this is wrong. No? So then they just disappear. So when they become more dense and rise up to colder air, that's when they discharge the rain. No? And not when they're about to evaporate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting metaphor, though, of the wax dissolving and melting over fire. It's like, oh well, that's how the rain comes whenever the clouds dissolve, and then they have to let their moisture. And okay, it's an interesting metaphor that he uses there.
That's certainly another example of him looking to the things around him that we can see here on Earth and analogizing that to as a possible method for what he sees above.
And again, it's that, I hesitate to say hedging your bets, but hedging your bets, it's like, well, it could be this mechanism or it could be this mechanism, and we're not sure, so I'm just going to put them both here.
Right. Okay, 517 is when we can expect a violent storm of rain when the clouds are driven close by the stroke of winds from without. That's, I guess, another water cycle type of a paragraph there. And when the earth thoroughly soaked sends back the vapors into the air.
And do we know if water cycle was an accepted sort of piece of knowledge back then? Is this a novel approach?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would expect Aristotle should have figured this out already.
Oh, that's a good point. The fact that the Presters are mentioned in Aristotle's meteorology treatise, I think, would be an interesting thing to look at in light of what Lucretius is talking about, to see what he actually figured out first. Not that I'm a big fan of Aristotle, but we'll use him for our own purposes if we have to.
Right. They certainly built on each other to some degree in terms of the observations that they made. It's really more the conclusions they drew from the observations that's the problem.
I would agree. I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And of course, 524 is a mention here of the nature of a rainbow. It doesn't really go into a lot of detail in explaining it, but
yeah, I was disappointed he didn't get into more like why there are and why there could possibly. Yeah. I would love to hear some explanations of why the colors of the rainbow show up from an Epicurean perspective, because I could probably think of like a dozen different reasons they could give for, well, it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this. It's like, it's so close. You left us hanging there. Leave them wanting more.
Maybe by omission, it's interesting to observe that he didn't see any need to refute the idea that it was a sign from God that he would promise never to send the rains to destroy the earth again. Yeah. So I guess maybe the Judaic tradition had not penetrated that far at that point where he thought it was necessary to mention.
I do find it interesting that he realized that it's something about the positions of the sun and the rain and the clouds that are what make the rainbow. I find that kind of an interesting thing, that it's like it wasn't just like a phenomenon that just was on its own, that you had to have these components in place to see the rainbow. So I think that's an interesting thing. And I'm sorry, I personally just find rainbows just fascinating.
Right. Well, prisms.
Exactly. The thing that I just read not that long ago was the fact that even two people standing next to each other don't see the same rainbow. It just blows my mind to think about the way that your eyes in relation to the rain and the clouds and the sun, and you're only seeing your rainbow and everybody else is seeing their own because of the way that the angles are and all that kind of stuff. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, this is probably the case when you stand close to the Niagara waterfalls, because then you're close to it. But if you're far away, if the cloud front is kilometers away, I think just a meter shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, Don. I've always found those fascinating too. So sorry he didn't go further into it. All right, and then passage 527, we can talk about that. One thing that jumps out at me to make a comment on is the very last of what we have here. Browne translates it that these things are easy to account for and to apprehend their causes if you consider well the virtue and power of the seeds from which they spring. And I'm going to jump to the conclusion that that's an example of how the word virtue originally meant strength or something like that. Would you say, Don? I wouldn't think that he's talking about their courage or their prudence or anything like that. Right. And maybe there's not even virtus in there, but
I don't.
In Monroe, and
I'll grab my lobe here real quick and see if I can figure out what's the 527.
I see Monroe says when you have fully understood the properties assigned to elements. And Bailey says, when you have duly learned the powers that are vouchsafed to the elements. Mm-hmm. So power might be another synonym for virtus, if that's the word that's there.
Yeah. And did you say that the lobe one has, and I can't remember who has it, when you have fully understood what qualities belong to their elements?
That was Monroe.
Oh, and this is Rouse and Smith in the lobe, so evidently they're using the same thing.
Okay. Do you see the Latin?
Yeah, and that last line, it looks like is cum bene cognoris elementis redita quae sint. So there's no virtue or anything in there that I can see. I'm going back a few more lines, and no. So maybe he's using virtue and power to stand in for the qualities that the others are translating as qualities. But virtue does seem to be an odd word choice there.
Yeah, but the other guys say power, or, well, powers is Bailey and properties is Monroe. I don't even see what word
qualities
there.
And qualities is...
Where does that even come from, Don? Is it the redita or?
Could be the redita. Let's see what redita. Talk amongst yourselves. Unfortunately, I don't have my Perseus project up right now, so
Well, you've probably said this already, but I'm looking at my lobe, and it says, when you have fully understood what qualities belong to their elements.
Right.
So I don't know where the word quality would come from there either. That all of that just wouldn't normally belabor something like that, but it certainly reminds me of some of the earlier discussions about the properties of the elements versus the qualities of the bodies. That elements only have certain properties, but when you bring them together into bodies, you have all of these qualities, which is where you get into the issues of accidents or events that arise from just the limited number of properties that the elements have. And so maybe he didn't intend to go that deep here, because I don't really see.
Yeah, I'm still digging around that Latin in there, and I cannot find. Redita did not seem to pan out.
Yeah, I don't see anything that looks like powers or qualities or anything there. What'd you say you found Redita to mean?
Just it looked like return or restored, or so that seems. Hold on a second. We got a couple minutes here. Let me bring up my my Perseus.
Because I presume that what we're really saying here as a conclusion for this section is that once you understand the elements that are involved in this, just basically just like anything else, and how they come together and operate, then that explains it without a reason for supernatural attribution.
And like I said, do you know where we'll be going in the next section? What we're going to be talking about? Because I just think it's hilarious that he lists all of those things: the hail and the storm and the ice, and this. It's like, oh, you can figure that out on your own. I've spent like the last 500 lines talking about wind, so you're on your own on that one.
Where we're going next week is earthquakes. So
okay, well that might be kind of interesting. Okay, I'll give
yeah.
that one.
Although there's a relationship with earthquakes in his view, that there's winds beneath the earth or winds affecting the earth.
Okay.
So he's not changing it quite as dramatically as we might think, but it's clearly a focus next week on earthquakes. I don't know. Maybe there's something about the Latin here. You're saying you're looking at the Perseus?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So elementum is, of course, the first principles or simple substances. I wonder if he's. Oh, that's interesting. So the conveni cognoris elementis redita quae sint. So the elementis there is actually in the Lewis and Short dictionary is like a first principle or an element, the first principles, rudiments in the arts and sciences, the 10 categories of Aristotle, the beginnings of other things. So maybe that whole idea of qualities is wrapped up in that word itself. Right. So those are like, you have to understand the first principles or the primary elements or the, the qualities of those elements. So that's interesting. And again, this is where I bemoan my lack of Latin. And I'm assuming cum bene cognoris is, it's good to know. The redita does have some connotations of to make or cause a thing to appear somehow. So maybe that's that phrase there is to give back or render a thing according to its nature or qualities. So those two words together might be getting at the whole idea of what those elements do or understand what their power is.
Well, after this discussion, I'm beginning to think to myself that maybe he's really just referring to that you can understand how all this works when you understand the basic processes that I've been discussing.
No, I think you're exactly right.
As opposed to going all the way back to the elements themselves or anything. He's talking more about the overall processes.
So you don't have to know about the seeds themselves, but the way the seeds have interacted in a larger context. You can figure out why these things all do what they do.
Okay, well, we've probably come to the end of a session for today. Let's talk about any general comments that anybody has about what we've covered so far today. Martin?
I have nothing to add.
All right.
Nope, I think I'm good. That sort of took all my steam out there at the end there. So
okay,
all of my vapors.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'll make some sense there as I edit about what we've just said about the way he's concluding that section as just a general statement that we can figure out the rest of the things that we see in the sky in terms of rain and clouds and so forth if we just start with the basics that he's been talking about over the last several paragraphs. And as we look forward, we'll be discussing earthquakes next week, and there's going to be some relationship to the winds and so forth. I think we'll find next week that he's talking about that there are maybe caverns and so forth beneath the earth that contribute to that. And while I don't think he's really focusing on winds beneath the earth, he does make a reference to that. So we'll be talking some more about what winds do next week.
And I think it's important to say too at the whenever we were talking about the elements there in that last line in Latin, we're not talking about the atoms. We're talking about the, like you said, the processes and things like that. So I wouldn't interpret elements as atoms there.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come to a close for today. We've got it, I would say, at least a couple more weeks before we get to the section that Dawn has been waiting for about the death and plague that subsumes and consumes all of Athens. So we'll have a little bit more time. And we're still looking forward to my anticipated discussion about magnetism. So
that's right.
That comes
that's right.
and so forth first too. So
okay.
Well, thanks for your time today. We'll come back in a week and continue on. So talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.